All right. Well, it is almost 8 o'clock here, and I'm sure some people will trickle in, and we will get started pretty much now. I do want to go through a few things before we do that, just to kind of orient everyone to what the purpose of this webinar series is. First, I'm going to ask if you're willing to turn on your cameras. We will keep the mics muted, but so many of us are used to now just staring at the wall or staring in our basement, and it's nice to get a sense of a community again. And so if you're willing and if you're able, that would be very appreciated. And we'll have some time for questions at the end as well, which would be great to be able to see you while we ask those. Some other things I do want to mention. So this is the first of three-part webinar series. And so I'm so thankful and so glad to have two of the best panelists to start this off with, and Nat Irvin and Brad Shuck. And I'll be formally introducing them in just one moment, but want to thank so many of you who are here today from the audience, because we specifically designed this webinar series with our community in mind, Louisville specific. As you might have noticed, this was an invitation-only event. We weren't really broadcasting this on social media or a lot of other places. We wanted to really get out and get our community partners, those who we've worked with in the past, or those who have a vested stake in not just Louisville, but the College of Business. And so we want to put together some resources and answer the questions that are most pressing for you all at this time. But we do hope to record these series, make them available for those who are interested afterwards. And so we do appreciate those who have sent in some questions that we will be answering today, but also those of you who just took the time this morning to spend a little bit of time with us. And so I will go ahead and get started with today's panelist. So this is our first of three webinars on leading through uncertainty, responding to critical leadership questions. And we're breaking the questions that we get that are coming in. And so if you have any more, please, again, feel free to throw those in the chat or send them to me. And I'll include my email at the end of this. But our first of three sessions is looking at strategy and engagement. And we got two of the best individuals here to answer your questions related to both leadership strategy, management, and employee engagement. So I do want to do a very brief formal introduction of our two panelists because we're so very honored to have them here today. So our first is Dr. Brad Shuck, who is an internationally recognized thought leader and researcher in the areas of employee engagement and leadership. He is a tenured associate professor and program director of the Human Resource and Organizational Development Program at U of L. And Dr. Shuck has more than 100 scientifically peer-reviewed articles and presentations. He's also the principal consultant of the Lead Research LLC and an advanced human resource analytics consulting group. And so, Brad, thank you for being here and very much appreciate you this morning. Our second panelist is Dr. Nat Irvin, who is the Woodrow M. Strickler Executive in Residence and Professor of Management Practice at the College of Business at U of L. He teaches graduate courses in the future of leadership and team dynamics in management. He has consulted numerous Fortune 100 companies on short and long-term planning. And he is also the founder of Thrivals. I know a personal champion of that project as well. And so he's also a featured TEDx speaker. And I actually watched one of yours last night, Nat, on what happens when everything changes. And that seems to be obviously a very appropriate title for some of the things that we'll be discussing today. So thank you both for being here.
Absolutely.
So one last thing that I forgot to mention, if you want to change, if you're not on it already, if you turn on speaker view for Zoom, I think that's the best for getting to see these two gentlemen, because we won't be sharing a lot of slides. They're welcome to put up whatever they want, but we're really going to set this up as a Q&A because we have at least 10 or 12 questions that have already been pre-submitted. And as again, if some come into the chat feature, we'll be sure to include those as well. But I want to go ahead and start us off. We have three kind of themes of questions today, one of which deals with just the uncertain conditions that we're in right now. The other deals with strategy and engagement, how to make the most of this situation that we're in and afterwards. Not all of them are related specifically to the short term, certainly some long-term thinking as well, which is our third category in looking ahead and planning for the future. And so beginning with that first series of questions on uncertainty, I'll just start with my own question here. What are some core principles in your two's mind that we should be focusing on as managers and leaders during these uncertain times?
Go ahead, Brad.
Oh, Nat, you beat me to the punch, man. I was gonna let you lead off today. Uh, so here's what I would say. I think with the companies that I've worked with over the last couple of weeks, certainly things are uncertain. Certainly things are a little bit unpredictable. I mean, even today on the news, we're talking about different supply chain issues. We're talking about reopening in places. We're talking about small businesses that are shutting down across the country, one per every hour, that will never reopen again. So if I was going to make a recommendation in terms of principles that I would use, I would use the principle of people first and inspire to a strategy. I think right now, the businesses that are sending a message that is going to resonate across the continuum of this particular context in our history will be those that focus on people and then inspire to a strategic plan. I think right now, detailed plans that are perhaps a little unpeople focused right now sound a little bit like white noise and get lost. And the reason for that is everything's coming at us at the same time, and our minds can only handle so much. Nat, what do you think, man?
Well, I love what you just said there, Brad, because it's the way that I think too. And I think that the thing that we're all dealing with right now is you hear people talk about what is the normal. We want to return to the normal because uncertainty causes us to reach back to normal when we thought things would somewhat predictable, but they were never predictable before, actually. And so what this pandemic does remind us of that we had already been living in periods of uncertainty. And I think the thing that we have to come to grips with now is, can we build within our own organizations, institutions, structures, the resilience that starts to accept that normal now is uncertainty? And so when you say, when we say uncertainty now, and the thing that attracts me as a futurist is, can we begin to now think mid to long term? Now, it's going to be hard. And I think when you were talking about the fact that you don't get into the details of talking about tactical things that you would do, obviously we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But the main thing is, how do you frame the time in which we're in now? And that's what I think employees and companies can do best, organizations can do best, is try to figure out, how do you frame now? And if you can get your team to understand or begin to deal with the notion of, what do we mean by normal? Return to normal. What does that mean? What normal might mean, which is what I would suggest to you, normal means living with uncertainty. And the final thing I would say is, and the way I think, you want to have some sense of why would you say that? Well, if this pandemic, if we think about this pandemic as just one of many to come, then you get the sense that, oh, okay, well then this is not, in other words, we are dealing with this pandemic now, but what if another one comes 20 months from now? Then you will say, oh, I understand, this is the new normal. And so the way that we define normal is a critical thing for thinking about the mid to long-term future. And I say that for managers going forward, companies going forward, you spoke about the number of businesses that are going out. I don't know if we've seen anything yet.
I don't either.
Not anything yet. And I think that the way that we are right now starting to understand how connected things are, and how we may have thought about normal in the past won't be normal in the future.
I think that's a great point there. Go ahead, Brad.
Yeah, let me jump in. I just want to piggyback on what Nat said there. The idea of framing this up, I think, is so key, and I think people are really, really thirsty for that. From a leadership perspective, those of us who can frame a message around, okay, here's the current context now. What are some things that we might be able to do to move forward as a team? But the framing of that, not only just the structural framing of that, like, here's the business operations, but here's the people operations. Here's how people are feeling. This is what's going on. And I think it's okay to say there are some things we don't know right now.
Absolutely.
That's okay. And that's okay.
Yeah, I do think that's really important. And because generally when you associate uncertainty, you are saying that there are things that we don't know, right? But we don't generally like to say things that we don't know. But right now, if you're going to tell me as a manager, if I'm your manager, and you're going to tell me you're going to know what the stock market is going to do on Friday, I'm not going to take you seriously. If you're going to tell me how resilient your supply chains are right now, I'm not going to take you seriously. The language that we use right now in the period of greatest uncertainty is critical, not to make big, broad statements about what you're certain about and how something is going to happen. And I will say this on a personal note, I tend to be optimistic about the future. But what I have done over these last few weeks is start to try to temper my own notions of my own optimism, to be just step back a little bit, to be a little bit more guarded, to be a little bit more temperate, to be to look for more information, to look for different places where I might get information, interview younger people, interview different segments of where I can get data to help me not just be so tempted to be so sure about what's going to happen around the corner. And I think that for employees, if you promise something during the periods of uncertainty, even in a short while, because we have to remember, in this uncertainty, our senses are heightened, our emotions are heightened, our awareness is heightened. And something that you might have said as a manager or leader a few weeks ago, months ago, wouldn't have meant anything. But now it means a lot.
Yeah, no, I think that's very well said, Nat. So let's get to some of the questions that we had submitted. And so we've removed some of the names here from submissions, of course, but I will kind of keep their original language here in context. So one of our questions that was submitted says, initially COVID had unified our organization and many of our team members were coming together on the same page. But recently some political division and other disagreements are starting to reappear and are now less constructive than usual. What can leaders do to unify employees right now and minimize unnecessary division at work?
I'm happy to respond to that. What a great question. I just saw this morning, I may have been yesterday, where some anonymous donor paid for all the groceries at the Kroger on Parkland, over by the University of Louisville, the one on Broadway, and another Kroger, where it paid for all the groceries, an anonymous donor. Now you think about, I'm not sure what motivated that person to do that, but what it reminded me of is in times of where we have great division, if you are a manager and you're struggling with division, you know, you've got the MSNBC, Fox kind of thing going on. The thing you want to do, and I can think about a specific colleague of mine who is now leading an organization. What he or she does is, by example, they are doing things that bring the rest of the team together. In other words, engage in an activity. For example, one of my colleagues is making masks. In other words, he or she leads an organization, but they're spending their other time making masks for others. So I'd say find an opportunity, find something that we all agree on and do that thing. And let that be the thing that you do now. Don't solve for division forever. Just right now, acknowledge the differences, but what we ought to do now is, can we all agree that we can see to it that these children get something to eat? Can we agree on some particular activity? And I'd say that would be a strategy for continuing to build team dynamics.
Absolutely. What are your thoughts there, Brad?
Yeah, so I love that example. There's something embedded in that example that I think is important for us to maybe even think about in terms of Nat's comment about don't solve for division right now, right? Like you're not solving for division forever. We're just trying to do something here together in the moment for the next little bit. That's something we can all agree on. There's a little bit of compassion embedded in that Kroger example. And the other examples you gave, how do we help people not be hungry? How do we help our neighbors who are in need? How do we help our communities that need a little extra help around? How do we help small businesses in our area by giving? And that's the thing about compassion, is it's not transactional, it's transformational. It fundamentally shifts the fabric of how something is being experienced right now, because we don't give compassionately because we expect something back. We give it because we see the need and we want to share.
Yeah.
And that changes everything. And I couldn't agree with Nat more there. Finding opportunities to bring us together, to rally around something that we can all dig into, whether that's an industry thing, whether that's a community thing. I think that's a really, really solid way to think about how do you continue to build engagement and unification at this particular time. I love that idea.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think when you think about kind of that rallying point, so much of what we think about in business, I think it goes back to one of your initial points there, Brad, is the people, right? Rally around your people there. And I think that can really be something to make sure that you get on the same page with. So related to that first question, though, we did have one other that kind of stems in relation to that. And it says, much has been discussed and debated about COVID-19 being a health and an economic crisis. For our small firm, we have specifically felt this when thinking about our own operations. How should managers approach the health versus economic tension associated with this situation?
Yeah, I can jump on this,
Okay.
and because I'd love to hear what Nat will say about this from a strategy and a future standpoint. The first thing, just to run a red thread through the first question to the second question, is I would watch out for fatigue. I think in the next couple of weeks, we're gonna see people forget. Like, originally, the neighbor down the street was top of mind for me because hey, maybe he needs something. I need to make sure I'm checking on him. Now we might be in a place where we are into some routines where it could be very easy to overlook some of that stuff. So I would encourage us to keep our eye on the ball with those compassionate actions, those opportunities to give to our community. In terms of how do you balance the health versus economic need, I thought a little bit about this question. I think the health of your employees, the health of the community that is what your organization is, has got to be the absolute number one thing, without question. And that means the physical health, the social health, the financial health, the emotional health. For some of us, the spiritual health. Where are we doing now? And then second to that, the economic health. Sometimes doing the thing that is going to help in the long term, that is going to engage in the long term, doesn't revolve around an economic decision. It revolves around a person decision, a people decision. And for me, the health priority here is absolutely number one.
Brad, I agree with you 100%. You make a fatal mistake if you get those two out of whack. And right now, if you give any indication that this idea of money and the equates with the health of your employees or their families, then what you will have done is you will have sent a signal to them. And they may not say anything about it, but later on you will see they will go to another company where that was not the case. And you can see what happens after. How did managers respond after 9/11? Or how did managers respond in times of crisis? Watch and see how employees respond when they're watching you in the midst of a storm. How did you treat the people? And the thing about it is, remember, this is all about how do people feel. The idea of whether a company is going to make it or not is a mid to long to short term. And there are a lot of things outside of that you'll have no control, absolutely no control over.
That's right.
I mean, do you think the Ford employees had control over the global supply chain, or that you can pick any company, local companies, the people that sell chocolate, they have any control over these big external forces? No, they didn't. So there you are, when you do have control over how you might allocate time or resources for your own employees, and you chose the external versus them, well, they make a decision. They may not say anything about that, but this is where I think leadership is key for the manager themselves. Managers themselves have to pay attention to their own health. You're not going to be very good leading if you're not well, and if you're not demonstrating that if you're working 18 hours, what kind of leadership is that? And this is one of the challenges we're faced with right now, because we're all askew, right? We're putting in all kinds of hours, but it's actually not healthy. We all know that. So what I'm going to suggest is that new practices, in addition to this dynamic with which we're responding to the economic versus the health, those are not, I don't think those are not real choices. You only have the health of your employees. If you don't have your employees, you have no company. But it is, and I understand the basis of the question, when you have limited resources and you can't, I understand that. What I'm really talking about is how does one position the values of the company during this particular time? Do my employees think that the company is more important than they are? And how one communicates that, how the subtle ways, the subtle ways that we communicate, the way that we're making decisions. Make the mistake of giving the impression that the company comes first, employees and their health come second. When this recovers, should it recover, you will have lost your best assets. Don't do it.
Absolutely. No, and I'm glad you mentioned that element too of how we communicate that. That's actually, we're getting a lot of questions coming in our survey that we sent out about communication and how we get that message out there. So we're actually, our third panel will be all about that.
Okay,
so I'm so glad you mentioned that. But a quick comment from the chat. So Virginia Denny actually mentioned that this really is a marathon and not a sprint. And I think that kind of summarizes too several of the things that both of you just mentioned, and that we have to be, willing to look into the health long term. And I think that's where too the mental, the social health, and all that kind of elements play a key role there for sure.
That's a really great observation there. Because again, that's the way you framing things. See, if it's a sprint, we do a lot of things differently than when we think about a marathon. When you think about 26 miles versus 400-yard dash, the amount of energy you use in a 400-yard dash is a lot, but you can recover quickly. But you do have to pace yourself, and I do think that's one of the that's a great great language to use in staff meetings, is framing it in context. This is a long-term period of uncertainty. This is not going to go away, so let's pace ourselves. Right.
Let me add one other thing here. I absolutely agree. And in marathons, we have water stations. We have places where we can take a reprieve. Yeah. We have places where we get energy. That's important in our personal lives and our work lives now. And I agree with Nat. The first couple of days, I tried to work as much as I thought I was going to be able to get as much done as I had gotten done before, maybe even more, because now everybody's home. Yeah. And my wife's a school teacher and my daughter's in the 3rd grade. Well, we can just all do this together, and this is going to be amazing. The first couple of days were rough in our house. Yeah. I didn't get as much done as I thought I was going to get done. Yeah. And so you could even change out the word productivity. So health versus productivity tension. And knowing that sometimes we have to put our health and our families and the things that are around us in a different priority level than maybe getting something done and pushing through something. Yeah. I think rethinking about the way we use our time and our energy is key here, because it is a marathon.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, I'd like to add one other thing, Zach, and I know that we probably have to move on, but this is one of those issues that Brad made me think about in context of balance. One of the new initiatives that I have undertaken now is, in the afternoons, I now take long walks. Long walks. And now if you think historically, the idea of walks, it is, if you look at the last 300, 400, 500, 600 years of how did people think, they did walk. They didn't run, actually. The running is a kind of a new thing for us, modern society. But when people would want to go and gather their thoughts, they would go on long walks. It is a natural thing to do. And I have been amazed at how much better my own health is now that I now dedicate time to go and walk. I'm not saying just go visit the neighbor. I'm simply saying taking time to walk. And so maybe as part of strategies for employee engagement, it is to encourage, to insist that employees go for walks, go have solitude time. One of the things I've noticed on Twitter and people who are trying to figure out how do you manage this particular time is the increase in the number of people who have decided that meditation, guided meditation, mindfulness, of course, this is not new, but this may be one of those things that you can offer to your employees by example. Sure. Make it okay.
Love it.
Absolutely. So we did get a quick comment here about, obviously the marathon, part of that has an end to it. And so obviously I think a lot of us are looking forward to the end of, what has been brought about by COVID, but we'll certainly be getting more into what does the end of this phase look like and how does that look like going forward. And so I'm going to address more from that comment here in just a few moments. But I want to skip to our next question here. And this one is one that hits near to home for a lot of people I know, certainly some people that we work with here at U of L and a lot of places throughout the Louisville community. It's a question about furloughs and about working with people who are maybe not currently working with us. And so this question comes from one of our partners. It says, my organization recently announced furloughs that impacted our team. That said, many still remain, and I'm unsure how to best manage, approach, and lead those who are still here under the current circumstances. I'm also uncertain what I can do for my furloughed people to make sure that they know that I am not forgetting about them. How should I approach these different conditions? Brad, we'll start with you.
Awesome. Well, the first thing I want to say is, if you've experienced that in the last couple of weeks, I'm sorry. It's hard. I think acknowledging that this is difficult is important. It's a deeply human emotion to feel that, to sadness and guilt and uncertainty and what may come from that. And so I'm sorry if that's something that you've had to do in tough conversations, for sure. I would use, so I think these two populations are very different. There's one who is the folks who are furloughed, and I think communicating with empathy, being authentic, which means not making broad stroke promises about how things are going to happen in the next few weeks because we just don't know, is really important. The empathy here is key. I think dignity here is key. Kristen Lucas at the College of Business is a world-renowned expert in the area of dignity. I think she's on the second panelist, and the next time. Dignity is about helping people remain human in times of challenge. And so how we frame up our communication with that, I think is really, really important, the words that we choose. And so as a strategy, I would recommend that you don't take those phone calls on the fly, or you don't make those decisions on the fly, but you write some things down. Here are some things I want to make sure that I say, not from, and I'm not saying from an HR like a legal standpoint. I think those things are important and your teams will give you those, but I'm saying from a people standpoint, what are some key messages that I want to make sure? Hey, I want you to know how much value you added to the team. Thanks for your time. Thanks for your heart. Thanks for being a part. Listen, we'll continue to communicate with you as we get more information and we know more information. The second population of folks I think you need to think about are the people who are not furloughed, who are staying. And it could be very easy to overlook that, like, well, everything's, business is normal. And back to Nate's point, what does that even mean right now? How do we even define what that looks like? And I think there could be some sadness and maybe even some guilt and shame that's associated with that, as colleagues who we love are no longer in the places where we would have predicted them to be just a couple of weeks ago. And so again, I go back to the empathy. This is challenging. These are hard decisions. I think it's key for leaders to be able to say things like that. I think it's vulnerability right now is really key. And I'm not talking about like the soft stuff, right? I'm talking about really hardcore vulnerability of, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm unsure myself, and have empathy in that communication, I think, is going to be key. But those are two very distinct populations of folks. Nat, what do you think, man?
Well, I love the way you frame that, Brad. The idea of thinking about both the people who are left and those whom we are separated from. That fear, that feeling of being separated. And I know how, I've been feeling about not even being around my colleagues, not the idea of being furloughed, but just the idea that I miss my colleagues, that I don't get to see them. I was sharing with somebody the other day about how after the first 3 days of this experience of social isolation, I was going like, I'm not really good at this. I hate this. I can't stand this. This is bad. And I mean, I had to really work with myself, just knowing how much I had missed seeing my colleagues every day, missed seeing them. It didn't mean that I was working with them, obviously I was in there. I may not be working with them directly on a project, but I miss seeing their faces. And go at the heart, we are social animals. We belong to each other. So now here we are in this period where not only do we have people who are separated by virtue of the pandemic, and now we're losing some of our family members as a result of the economic stress. This is really sad. And there's no way to say, to sugarcoat or to say that it's sort of a technical separation. No, this is all about emotions. And I think the being careful, being sensitive, being immensely human during this time, and is one of those critical things that people will always, as I always remember my friend and colleague Maya Angelou talking about, you know, what people, not what you did, but how you made people feel remains one of those central core arguments or principles for me. What did you say? How did you make people feel? And I think that, you know, there are things you can do. You can write, you can call, you can reach out. You can be careful, I think, in terms of people who are left, being the group that's left versus the people that have separated, being careful about how we communicate what's going on here versus what's going on over there. You know, the notion that something good is happening over here and you're not a part of it. Yeah, I couldn't think of anything worse than that.
Yeah, I can't.
But I think if you really have appreciated, if you really do appreciate your colleagues and what they have meant to you, then do something about it. Say something about it in an authentic way.
Absolutely.
And say that would be redundant. It's such a sensitive matter that people have to know, have to feel that the separation of the furlough was not because of something they did, but circumstances out of the control of all of us. And therefore, and that's where a manager, teams have to come together to reassure, even the most assured among us still doubt that. And I think that's where a good manager, good leader can really prove themselves worthy.
Yeah, I appreciate both of your points there because I think they're so spot on, especially Brad. I know you mentioned the idea about being vulnerable, and I think you could really tell, you could sense that when your leaders are vulnerable, when we're vulnerable. And it almost goes counterintuitive to what we think of as leadership, or at least many of us, I think. We think of leadership as being confident, self-assured, knowing where you're going, being assertive, and vulnerable almost seems the opposite at times, that you're kind of open for the taking shots, and that I think it's so critical, though, that we have leaders who are vulnerable right now, because I think it's a huge part of that compassion element that you're talking about, too, that's so needed right now. So I appreciate your comments there. All right, moving on here, there are some questions that I think directly tie into this, and so I want to get to a few more of them as well. I'm going to move down to one that's about an actual team member who's been impacted by COVID and some things related to that. So a comment here first, it says, most of my team has remained healthy and safe during this period, but 2 of my employees have had direct family members test positive for COVID. How can I best support these specific members of my team, so those whose family members have tested positive? And also, what can I do with all of my employees to encourage a supportive culture? So Nat, let's start with you there.
Sure. Well, I would, 2 things that strike me. One is the need that we all have as citizens and then as members of organizations to understand more fully COVID-19. There's so much misinformation right now about the implications for COVID, how it is transmitted, how the disease impacts various communities. And I think one way that as a manager, you can assure members of your own family, members of your own team, is to spend time understanding what the disease is about. So there is a learning capacity that we need to build within organizations right now about the coronavirus itself. I noticed that the Wharton School has now created a new course called Coronas and Leadership in Management. I mean, basically looking at the whole impact of the coronavirus and its impact across a whole wide range of different areas. But what I'm getting at here is the notion, and what I took from that, and what I would like to offer in here, is that if a family member of your team, a member of your family, a member of the team family member specifically is having an issue, you will be better off if you better understand the disease itself and not just speak in broad generalities. Obviously, we've already spoken about the importance of empathy, compassion, et cetera, understanding, but bringing knowledge, bringing understanding, being specific about what this disease means to them gives you a better chance of responding to what their needs are. Generalities, I understand that, but I think here you need to know something about the disease itself. And so I'm going to advocate that parts of what an organization ought to do now is build some time to learn more about the disease itself and how different bodies are responding to it. The very person, you or I might be the very next person who right now looks like we are immune, but it might not be the case. And so learning more about the disease, I think, is a capacity that organizations might want to use as a way of understanding one's own team members better.
What are your thoughts, Brad?
Yeah, so love that. Knowledge is, I always tell our students, knowledge changes the game. Data changes the game. It changes the conversation. So I couldn't agree more. Learning more about the virus and its and how it is impacting organizations and how it's impacting people, I think is going to be absolutely important. The as a strategy. So when we think about, all right, what do I do to best support my team member? That's a rough question.
Yeah.
Here's my recommendation. I'd ask them, what do you need? And if they say nothing, that's okay. So one of the things about compassion is that it doesn't require a response. It doesn't require a response from anybody, but it's in the offering. And so I would encourage, because Nat, maybe I don't know what somebody who has COVID-19 needs, because I don't have COVID-19 and I've not had it yet. And so I wouldn't have a clue what somebody would need, but I would ask. And then if they say nothing, say, awesome. Do you mind if I check in with you in a couple of days? Just to see how you're doing. How's your family? Is there can I drop a meal by? Can I drop a gift card by? Can I, whatever. But if they say, I could really use some help with X, Y, Z, I would move heaven and earth to do whatever it is within my power to help them. And if that is, I can't cut my grass, as pedestrian as that sounds, I'd go cut the grass. If it was, my kid needs some help with some homework, I'd get on a Zoom call with them and I'd try to help them with their homework because they're having trouble breathing. Whatever it is they needed. But I think the key thing here is I would just ask, what do you need? How can I help? What can I do for you? And then maybe set some reminders in my calendar as a strategy. Make sure to check back in with Nat. Make sure to check back in with Nat. Make sure to check back in with Nat. Just so that's always top of mind for me in helping out. I would ask.
Yeah, no, I think that's perfect. And both of you, I think, kind of highlight, different elements of the same concept, which is being informed, right? I think so many times we look at empathy as this kind of mysterious construct that can't really be defined. Empathy is really just about understanding the other's point of view. And so to be informed, I think, is so critical in that. And so I appreciate your comments there. All right, go ahead, Brad, if you had something else there.
Yeah, so just to connect with that idea of empathy here, empathy also comes without judgment, right? So I'm not judging what someone's asking for. I'm not judging that how did you get COVID-19? How could you have done that? Like, I'm not judging you. That empathy comes without a judgment statement here. And so if whatever somebody's response is, that's okay. It's perfectly okay.
Sure. And Brad, I'm going to put you on the spot here, but I've actually heard you talk about this in another example about the umbrella example that you mentioned before. Would you mind sharing that one real quick?
Yeah, sure. So when we talk about compassion, I tried to think of like a framework that I could utilize to understand what compassion looks like in action. And the idea of sharing an umbrella on a rainy day is something that really spoke to me. When we see somebody, we're walking down the street and they're dripping wet, and we have an umbrella, right? And we know we can go and share that umbrella with them. We don't run up to them and say, why didn't you watch the weather today? Like, didn't you know? Aren't you prepared? You didn't, in the business context, didn't you get that email? I mean, we sent several emails. How do you not know how to use Zoom now? Like, what's wrong with you? Like, there's no judgment in that statement, right? We walk up, we say, hey, can I share my umbrella with you? And we give because compassion is not something people earn. It's something that we give. To just circle back to that conversation we had earlier today. And so sharing my umbrella is an act of compassion. The other thing that I think is important about compassion is it requires a committed pursuit. And so if I see somebody that needs something, they're walking down the street and it's raining and I have an umbrella, I don't duck into a building. I don't change directions. I don't point my finger and laugh. No, I pursue them. Hey, can I share my umbrella with you? How many times at the University of Louisville, I'm walking out of the university club to my office and it's raining outside and I've shared an umbrella with somebody that I don't even know. And they drop me off at the building. We say, have a great day, be well. Thanks for your time. Thanks for sharing. So this idea of sharing your umbrella in a work context is about unearned compassion is not something we earn. And it is about a relentless pursuit, a committed pursuit to other people.
Zac, I'd like to respond to Brad's excellent comment about the umbrella, because what it illustrates to me, again, is that in times of uncertainty, you will see now that people who have managers can't all of a sudden develop compassion. That the instinct to want to share an umbrella is not something that you suddenly, employees look like, oh, now he wants to, or he or she wants to share the umbrella.
That's right.
These are practices that would have been built into the culture, one's own practice. And that's why when you have moments of uncertainty, you can look, we look for people of whom we can trust, because, and why trust is so important, because trust is earned. The notion of being able to share one's resources, being able to look out for one's employees, this is the time where if you have built that up all along, it will manifest itself now. And while people will be obviously looking, they will know to whom to turn during times like this. So Brad would be a person you can know he's going to share his umbrella. Or this person I described earlier, you can know that he or she is going to want to build masks for others, because this is what he or she does all the time. And so, this period of uncertainty, it is being preceded by other practices that we have done. And they're now manifested during this particular time. Now, I love the example of the umbrella, of sharing, because that is why organizations right now, why you will say we don't have trust, because we have not before demonstrated trust. And so you're not going to be able to go put it in the microwave and now say, here we are, I'm empathetic, or put it in the microwave and now I've got It's just not going to happen. And it's not going to happen now. Authenticity is earned over long periods of time. Our own social awareness, our own sense of empathy, it is developed over time. These experiences, these critical moments like we're experiencing right now, will be the moments later on when, the sort of the ocean swells will go down a little bit, when we will look back and say, you remember when you did this for me? Or when you said this to me, or when you wrote me this note, not an email or a text, although I'm not saying that's not important, but when you took the time to send me that card that said, when my daughter was ill during COVID, I got this note from you, or when I got this gift basket from you, when I received this is the thing that I remember. And I still think now, the value of something as technical and as simple as a thank you note, a simple thank you note, still has one of the most valued currencies of the past, the present, and in the future. The idea of taking the time to write a note and to reflect on somebody's behavior. I still think, imagine that in the midst of all this, the value of a handwritten note.
No, I think that's fantastic, Nat. So I appreciate you sharing that. You brought up trust. We did get another question specifically about trust. And so it says here, due to unrelated and related COVID-19 issues, my team is suffering from multiple mistrust problems that is limiting our performance and our engagement. What strategies can help me rebuild the trust, and what things should I be doing as a leader to help my team trust each other and my leadership? So Brad, we'll start with you on that one.
Yeah. So for me, trust is about predictability. Even in negative circumstances, I can trust that circumstance is negative or dysfunctional. or I can trust that that circumstance is positive. And so here we're in such a place of unpredictability where I don't know what may happen later. My wife and I were on the Board of Education call yesterday, live streaming, because we're trying to figure out what's going to happen with school and when things going to be out, and can we go do and there's so much unpredictability. Here's a specific recommendation I would make about how to build trust back into the organization in times like this. Calm, predictable communication. Calm, predictable communication, not erratic, chaotic, emotionally heightened communication that is coming at all hours of the night or all hours of the day, but setting up a time where there's a specific point in the week or a specific point in the day where we're sharing information that is pertinent, important, that allows predictability, a sense of non-chaosness in the middle of chaosness. And I think it's really important to do that in a calm way. And so I'm going to go back and say, I'm going to recommend writing some notes down to make sure that you're communicating the points that you want to make a point of, but also the human things. Make sure to say these things, use these kinds of words, have empathy here, try not to judge statements, blah, blah, blah. Because those things are going to be really important for us. But calm, predictable communication is one strategy that I would give.
Yeah, Nat, what are your thoughts?
Well, Brad really hit on the notion of predictability, which I also agree with, and I loved the fact that he was talking about in our communication, the written communications and the way that we behave toward what we say to one another as well. I think, the notion of when do we decide to trust people doesn't occur. It takes time. And obviously this question is reflecting a long, perhaps maybe some challenges that have happened over a period of time. But you can start. You can start. And people are forgiving. People are forgiving, but they pay attention. You remember, in heightened awareness, we're paying attention. Is this the same BS that I've gotten before, or is this something different? Right. So there's incumbent upon the manager who has to earn trust to demonstrate a willingness to say, look, I have not done X, Y, and Z in the past. Can I re-earn your trust? You got to start there. If you start with a position of saying, I'm trustworthy, as if nothing has ever happened, you're kidding yourself. You're not going to, people don't do that. People are forgiving. Managers will be, employees, we will forgive each other, but show me a willingness that you asking me to trust you again. Give me a pathway to do that. But I'm not going to just give you that on the basis of you walking into my office and saying, trust me. Yeah, trust you for what? I can think about all these other examples of why I never would trust you. And now you want me to trust you. No, it's earned over time, but you can start. But you begin by asking for another opportunity. And then step by step, demonstrate some ways, small things, deliver. Don't make big promises. Don't go too far out. Don't try to hit the 3-point shot. Make free throws first.
Okay, a couple things, Nat. I can't believe you just brought up basketball, because my heart is hurting from missing some of the season this year. So I'm gonna go have an extra cup of coffee later to kind of move myself through that. Two things to respond to that. Just to connect with what Nat's saying. Plant the tree today, right? If you've not already planted it, plant it today. Today's your day to do that. And then for those of us who have young kids at home, or just those of us who are Disney fans, you may have seen Frozen 2. So I'm gonna draw an analogy from that. Make the next best decision. It's okay. Right now is what it is. Make the next best decision. Yeah. And that's gonna help you build that trust over time and asking. Yeah, Nate, you're spot on, man.
I love that. I think one, as having seen Frozen 2 too many times that I won't admit here on camera, that definitely rings true. I think for a lot of people, though, is that while what's done is done, and what's, so we talked about some of the uncertainty already that we can't necessarily predict, we can predict our next decision, right? And keeping a focus on that, making sure that it's the right one, I think is very critical. So I just want to conclude here for some of the strategy engagement comments, because we've talked about some things like empathy and trust, but this one I think kind of puts a perfect bow on it. It says, a person who's wrote in here says, I've been told for many years that I'm not the most sensitive person and my emotional intelligence could use some improvement. Part of me have always assumed, and I think there's a lot of people out there who are like this, that this is just the way I am. But are there strategies to help people like me, and I'm using all the original language here, improve on things like empathy and understanding? Brad, let's start with you there.
Yeah, so my immediate reaction to that is, in the way the question is formed, are there strategies to help people like me? The first thing if I was talking to that person, I would say, there's nothing wrong with you. You're great. You bring gifts and skills and talents, and it's about figuring out how you capitalize on those and how we, there's nothing wrong. It's okay. Can you learn to be empathetic? I think so. I think taking long walks like Nat has recommended. I think taking notes down to make sure here are some key points. Maybe your mind goes to the strategy first. And so knowing that, you may want to write some notes about, all right, well, here are some things that I want to make sure that I communicate with my folks. Me, I don't think about the strategy first. I think about the people first. So I can get lost, and we can talk no strategy, and that's not a good thing either. There's a nice delicate balance here that I think we want to strike, but there's nothing wrong with being non-emotional and so, like those are strengths and skills. So I'm struggling with, how do I help people like me? And I would just want anybody to know that I don't feel like I'm particularly emotionally intelligent. I might push back on that a little bit and say, I think you may be. It may manifest itself in other ways, and those ways are perfectly okay. But I would encourage guided meditation, taking time, reframing my priorities, thinking about my to-do list, taking long walks, getting out doing. I think when we other focus, we're other people focused, that helps us build the muscles around empathy and authenticity and dignity.
Great.
Brad, I think I love your examples of the specific kinds of tactics that a person can do. And those are great. I would add to this that I also think studying other people is a good way to learn how to be empathetic or to develop this capacity. For example, I've been paying attention to who are the most successful leaders right now during the COVID crisis. Turns out that many of them happen to be females. The Prime Minister of New Zealand, the Prime Minister of Finland, the Prime Minister, the President of Germany. There are 5 women who just seem to be extraordinary, not because of their gender necessarily, but because of the management strategy that they have taken. And you see some of the behaviors that they have demonstrated in leading their countries through this crisis, and it's very similar. The excellent listening skills, great communication skills, measured in the way that they are measuring risk or understanding risk and communicating to others. So if a person is when I'm trying to learn a skill, for example, I'll use an example of trying to, I'm a classical guitarist. When I'm trying to learn how to play a more difficult piece or something that's way beyond my capacity, what I do is I go get a teacher. I get with somebody who is better at it than I am, and I ask them, tell me, how do you do your hands like this? And then if they're not the right person, if I can't get it from them, I go someplace else. So if a person is serious about this, then seek out others who are better at it or who are good at it and ask them to work with you. Get a coach. Become a learner of it. And you're not going to suddenly become this great empathetic person overnight. But if you're serious about it, study people who are good at it. Reach out, study, read. The other thing I would say is this, and I really recommend this for managers, leaders all the time. Spend more time reading long biographies of people. Read long stories, longer histories, novels. Spend more time on the long forms of thinking and watching, see how do human beings behave. And I think that's one of the things that we sometimes miss in this really fast-paced society is we don't do the long reads. We don't read books that are 300 pages or 400 pages long. We're in the short, it's always got to be the concise, the short. But in fact, being a human is a long form. And you know, one of the great gifts that we received from the 18th century is the creation of the novel. And I think when you study what a lot of really successful managers and leaders do today, is they are spending more time reading. And this is not just something that has happened. This is over the last 25 and 30 years. And I recommend spending more time read long stories of why was the story of FDR. Why would this nation elect a man 4 times? How did he manage crises during the Dust Bowl when the earth turned dark for, you know, during the 1930s? How did he manage to get our country through that period of time? Reading just stories of people who were very successful in management and leadership, how did they do it? And I think that translates a little bit into helping us to find our own skills within ourselves. Learn from each other.
Now, I so appreciate what you said there, because I'll be honest, one of the reasons I put together this webinar was that I wanted a chance to learn from people like yourself. And I think that's such a key point there, and such an important recommendation just to take into consideration. So Brad, did you have something else you wanted to add with that?
No, other than that's a brilliant comment. I couldn't agree with Nat more. Looking at other people, asking, finding a mentor, reaching out is a great way. And if you're serious about it, giving it dedication and time and space in your day is going to be important. Yeah, Nat is on the money with that.
Absolutely. All right. So speaking of Nat being on the money, his primary area here is certainly looking into the future. And I know he's been waiting to get into some of these questions. And so we did get one from the chat that I'm going to bring in here in just a moment. But first question here, what are some opportunities that may indirectly or directly come from this current crisis? And how can leaders begin to strategize and leverage these opportunities to our advantage in the days ahead? Nat, let's start with you there.
Well, you know, I've been thinking about this from both a personal standpoint as well as what small organizations might do on the other end of the recovery. And then, of course, I've been thinking about it from the third perspective of what we as a society might do. Here's what I hope happens. And that is that we start to get a better balance between stakeholder and shareholder. And I think that's where the opportunity really rests with organizations. What we as a business school will teach, what the country, what the world will start to see is the interdependence of our systems. Somebody described recently this pandemic and what it's done to the economy as different than 2008. Because you could describe 2008 as a heart attack that hit the financial services industry, that hit the finance part of our economy. But that this particular illness that we're experiencing now is systemic, that you can't fix it by saying we're only going to fix what happens in Kentucky, or we can only fix, if we just fix New York, then everything is fixed. No, actually what's happening in Paris, what's happening in Milan, what's happening in Ankara, what's happening in Berlin, is going to actually impact what happens in Ethiopia or what actually. So when you have this kind of systemic injury, then what I'm hoping happens and what I think companies can start to do, organizations, we as people, start to become a lot more sensitive to the interdependence of the large and the small, that we're all connected together. We will be different after this time. But I think the idea of rebalancing our health, rebalancing the priorities, is growth the only important manifestation? Is that the only value on which we will evaluate success? Growth, more growth. Is that the only value? Is a profit the only basis on which to have an organization? You will see that right now, there are a lot of organizations, a lot of managers and leaders who are calling from, and they're from the capitalist side saying, hey, listen, we have too much inequality in our system. We have not paid enough attention to the people who deliver our food. We have devalued education. We're not paying the teachers enough. We are not paying enough attention to other parts of our society. We've ignored too long people who don't look like us. So I'd say that one of the capacities that I hope comes out of this is a rebalancing of time. We have always put as a primary value efficiency. Okay, efficiency is okay, but now it turns out efficiency is what screws up the global supply chain because it wasn't resilient. So maybe now what we need to build in is the capacity for resilience and not use efficiency as the key indicator of whether that's the way that's the most successful or most important marker to determine whether it's successful or not. So I don't want to go on too long, but I'm going to say fundamentally a rebalancing. And I look at stakeholder, shareholder as a nice way of looking at the dynamics, the global, the big, the employee, us as people versus our system. I got other things on my mind as well too.
No, thanks for sharing that, Nat. And Brenda, real quick from the comment box, definitely shared a thought that also came to my mind. Simon Sinek talks about this some in The Infinite Game, and so that's another resource to look at for those who are interested. But Brad, what are your thoughts on this?
I'm smiling. I thought you might toss it over to me. And following Nat on a comment about the future is a relatively impossible task. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm gonna key in on some of the things he said. In our community, what would a resilient supply chain look like? I'd change it. That fundamentally changes the way that we see things. What if efficiency isn't the marker? What if growth isn't the marker? What if the health of our population was our marker?
Oh, wow.
What if inclusion and equality across the community was the marker? It would change everything. And to be honest with you, I'm kind of hopeful about that. I mean, those are the things that I hope change, right? Like, this is a chance for us to reset in some ways and to shift our mind. I can't even wrap my head around what a resilient supply chain might look like, and the case scenarios that we might use to teach something like that, right? Like, because it's very different than the ways in which we have traditionally thought about business and organizations and communities.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I did not envy you for having to follow up, Nat. I'm glad it wasn't me. So I just get to ask the questions. All right. So one more question, and then I am going to bring in a comment or a question from Mark Adams in the comment box. Yeah. But it says here, one that we had pre-submitted, my organization operates in a face-to-face industry primarily, and they identify as customer service. What does the fallout look like when we return to in-person services, and what should we be focusing on? So let's go ahead and start with you, Brad. That way you don't have to follow Nat on that one.
Awesome. So my wife and I were thinking about this last night as we thought about, all right, well, what happens when we go back to restaurants, or we go back to like, we have some things we need to go shop for around our house that we don't want to get online because you want to go see and touch things. What does that look like? And we kind of got a taste of that. We went out to Home Depot a week or so ago, and it looked like this, right? We had our masks on. We were careful. There were lines. There was social distancing. There was a different way, and I'm not going to call it normal. I'm not going to call it new. I'm just going to call it. There was a different way to conduct business. Here's what I will tell you, though. I was really, really grateful for the help for the people that were there. I've never looked at the folks who checked me out at the grocery store with such heartfelt thanks. The folks who are stocking bananas, or the butcher that's in the back. I've never been more helpful for the two men who helped me pick something up and put it into my truck because one person couldn't do that. And I think there's going to be a heart of gratitude from the customer side of things. And there's going to be a real relief from the ownership side of things. We can now serve. One of the things that I noticed in the Louisville food community is that there's so many people, this is what they believe. They're born to do these things. They're born to serve and help and to give, and their passion is around these areas. I think there's going to be relief that they can finally get back to their art. They can finally get back to serving other people. They can finally get back to doing what they believe they're supposed to be doing. And from the customer side of things, man, I think you're going to see just a real heart of thanks and gratefulness from people around. And I hope that catches fire here in Louisville and well beyond.
Nat?
Brad, very thoughtful reflections there. I'd say that one of the ways to kind of get a sense of what might happen is to pay attention to organizations like Waffle House. See what they do.
Yep.
And watch and see what Chick-fil-A does. Groups like that. Watch the fast foods. These are always leading indicators of so much data about the future. I mean, I've always, it's one of the ways that I've learned so much about the future is to watch certain kinds of industries, watch what certain kinds of front interface with customers, watch and see what people do. And so I'd say pay attention to what Chick-fil-A does, because they're very customer sensitive,
yep,
quality driven, and they will be slow to move. Even no matter what the governor of Georgia says, they'll be slow to move. But Waffle House has got this particular niche too. And one of the things they've done is as I understand it, they've removed all menus from the table. So I don't know all of their what their strategy is going to be, but watch those kinds of like Taco Bell, perhaps, places like that, to see the kind of early indications how we respond as customers and as how they respond as providers. And that may give us some indication how, for example, we've already seen in grocery stores, they've already put up the walking down the aisles one way, directing one-way traffic that way, or we've put up all the managers, excuse me, not the manager, but the suppliers now have masks on. And stores will be requiring for you to come in that you also have a mask. So I don't know where this is all going to go, but it's sort of right now a little dance. And I think the thing that determines how the dance actually ends is what happens with this virus. If the curve continues to go down, we will become less concerned about risk and we'll take more risk. People will start to return to some other way that we have previously interacted with one another. But right now it's a dance. And I'd say indicators, just pay attention to what Chick-fil-A does, watch and see what Waffle House does. In particular, when Chick-fil-A gives a clue to go forward, that'll be an indication that something has happened.
Okay, great. So I do want to get to a few things from the comment box, the chat box. And so we'll kind of make this to the last call for those if anybody has anything. But a question earlier, or comment earlier from Mark Adams was regarding our marathon discussion. And he mentioned that, marathons have an end. So can we expect this this marathon to have an end, this specific marathon with COVID, with the conditions and some of the things, and or what does the new norm look like? And I think that's really where the interesting discussion can be. And so we'll defer to our two panelists. What does some of the new norms look like in your mind, and how can we navigate those as leaders going forward?
Yes. Here's what I'd say about are we going to have an end? Oh, absolutely. Yeah. The marathon will end. Another one may start. This may be a triathlon. This may not be just a running race. We may have to adapt to a new way of doing something that is then going to create another trial and opportunity for us. But will this one end? Yeah, it will absolutely end. I mean, historically, looking back on events like this throughout the world, yeah, they end. Are we going to be different at the end of it? Absolutely. And in the same way that I would be tired after I ran a 26-mile marathon, my body's going to be different. My mental state's going to be different. My emotional state's going to be different. And it's going to require us to do different things at the end of this. There's no doubt about that.
I think the way, Brett, I thank you for your comment too. Mini marathons certainly is one way of thinking about this. I also think about it from a generational standpoint. If you're part of what's called Generation Z or Generation C, you're wondering what the rest of the boomers are thinking about, because all you've known so far has been what? You had a stock crash in 1987. You had the dot boom crash in 1999, 2000. You had 2001, 9/11. You had the Great Recession in 2008. And now here you have this pandemic, and all you've known is turbulence. For me, at age 68, I've known obviously we've had some turbulence as well, but my perspective over this period of time, over these last few years has been, I've never really worried about this. Uncertainty may be something that's been personal, that is my own decisions, what would happen to me, but I've never really experienced uncertainty with regard to my own, the economy of the government. I've never experienced that. We've never experienced that, but they have, and they are now. And I think that going forward, one way that I think it would be helpful to think about this is the beginning of when we start to understand we have already built the capacity to deal with earthquakes. We have built the capacity to deal with hurricanes. We have built the capacity to respond to tornadoes. We have not built the capacity to deal with pandemics. We will now start to build the capacity to deal with pandemics. That's right. And once you build the capacity to deal with pandemics, you don't go back. That means that you necessarily have to think about the interconnectedness of healthcare systems. It changes fundamentally the way you distribute resources. And so germs don't have favorites. They may look like they have favorites, but they actually don't. And that's the lesson we're going to learn. Pandemics have been with us since the beginning of time. And they take out various groups of people, but they always remind the species, we're at the top of it, that at any given time, I'll come and get you. And that's the part that where our advantage as a species of being social animals, being able to cooperate, to be able to solve problems collectively, that's our advantage. But if we don't do that, we can get taken out.
Absolutely. And so I do want to just...
Next generation, go ahead, Zach, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, Nat. So I did want to just offer a very quick thank you to both of you. And we do have just a few minutes remaining here. I want to ask for a quick concluding thought from you as well. But it does look like we've answered most of the questions in the comment box, other than a case of hunger that seems to be going through some of our participants. So we'll be sure to get you out on time for that. But I want to ask something that's really challenging for academics, myself primarily being included in that, and that is to be very brief, but let's see if we can briefly, if you can, in 30 seconds or so, summarize what are your most important takeaways from this. And I would ask you too to give us one thing that you think managers should do today, something that quick, easy strategy that you think they can do today to help build their team together, to help move their team forward. Something obviously that's realistic, doable. What are your thoughts there? And I'll start with you, Brad.
Okay. So the one thing that I would encourage you to do today is to find an opportunity at some point in the day to reach out to people on your team, to say thank you, to be grateful, to share a kind word, to be compassionate, and to do that today. I'm going to challenge you. And to also, if you're home with family or you're home with loved ones, that you find a way to do that with them as well. The one thing that I cannot get out of my mind from this conversation is, what does a resilient supply chain look like, and how is it interconnected across the globe, and how is that going to be a game changer, and what happens when we layer equity and inclusion on top of that, and how we help everybody. I want to thank Zac for putting this together, and I always learn when I'm in the presence with Nat, and today is no exception to that.
Well, Brad, you're so kind. You and I've always talked about wanting to work together, and I just love your spirit of compassion. It's reminded me of how important it is for compassion to be a part of our management and our leadership. And I think that our conversation today, Zac, and thank you so much for bringing us all together here on the notions of management and leadership in context of the future. I'm hoping that that maybe one thing that people will do today is learn a particular skill that you've always wanted to learn. Some people are learning a new language, meaning like Spanish, but there are other languages that you can learn. And I think the idea of building in the capacity to learn still remains to me one of those key elements that makes us as humans better going in the future. So pick something and learn it. Start and just this, whatever that might be. If it's going to be gardening, if it's going to be a new instrument, or if it's going to be some particular skill, just re-emphasize the importance of being a learner.
No, and I think that's, whether you knew it or not, it's the perfect segue to our next week's conversation. So again, this is one of 3 parts in the webinar series, and next Monday, so for anyone who's interested, next Monday, we will be doing the second part of this, really focusing on organizational learning and adaptability.
Okay.
And so I think it's a perfect, again, segue there, Nat, and I appreciate you doing that. Again, I want to thank the 2 of you for your insightful comments. I know our audience certainly, hopefully got a lot out of it, and several of the comments suggested that they did. I also want to thank our executive education team who's helped put this together. They've done great work with this, and they continue to do great work during this time, and will continue to do it going forward. And so thank you to them as well. And lastly, I want to thank those of you who showed up today and who attended for your comments, your questions in the comment box. If you have any other questions that did not get answered, feel free to either shoot them in the text box or send them to us via email. We'll be posting some links there that you can get those in, and we can answer your questions in the part 2. Otherwise, thank you both again for your time, and right at 9:15, so we can all go get either chicken sandwiches or breakfast or whatever it is. But thank you all so much.
Bye, guys.
All right, take care.